The words landed like a fist. I invited another man to spice up our marriage. He knows how to please a woman. He'll show you what you couldn't give me in 18 years. My anniversary cake sat between us, frosting melting into a sticky mess on the plate. I could feel the candle's heat on my cheeks, but it had nothing to do with the flame. For a second, the world reduced to the distance between us, the tiny space where 18 years of phone calls, stolen kisses, shared bills, and dull silences had lodged themselves like grit under the skin. I swallowed and tasted metal. If he steps into my house, I said, words careless and cold as a blade, I will rip his Johnson off. She laughed, a brittle thing, and the laugh was proof enough of how much less any of this meant to her now than it did to me. Then the bell rang. When I opened the door, the man on the porch gave a small, ridiculous smile that somehow made my stomach fall through the floor. He was my best friend. He had the same crooked left eyebrow that rose when he was about to lie. He was wearing the jacket I'd borrowed in winter, had once given me a ridiculous nickname, had stood beside me beneath street lamps while I cried about things I never said aloud. He was the man who, if I'd ordered someone to stand in front of me and tell me everything I wanted to know all at once, would have been the last face I expected. "What are you doing here?" I said. The question was simpler than the one I meant to ask. He hesitated on the threshold like a man entering a storm. "We need to talk," he said. His eyes flicked past me to her, and there was pity there, the sort of pity that doesn't belong to friends. It belonged to observers. Her smile flattened. "You invited him," she said to me with a casualness that tasted of contempt. "He's here." What happened next was not the jagged, physical snap I'd promised. It wasn't the violent, glorious ending my adrenaline imagined. It was something worse, cleaner, quieter, and infinitely more surgical. It was the beginning of everything I hadn't known how to stop. I married for the small mercies, someone who noticed when I'd run out of coffee, someone who knew the peculiar way I liked my shirts folded, someone who understood that the edge of my jokes hid a tiredness. 18 years blurred into routines so fine they were invisible. I began to notice the spaces she filled with things that weren't me, new playlists, candle scents I didn't recognize, a scarf folded on the back of a chair with the sort of care given to something new and secret. Tonight she called it spice. I call it a breach. He, my friend, crossed the threshold as if he'd been invited for dessert. He placed his palm on the banister and kept his eyes low. "I didn't come to do anything to you," he said, voice low and quick. "You didn't come to do anything to me," I repeated, watching for the lie as if it might show itself on him like a bruise. "Then why are you here?" He lifted his chin, and the way he looked at her was not the look two men would give a woman they wanted to possess. It was a look that had been with me through every minor disaster, one that had once fixed the back wheel of my bike in a rainstorm and stayed to drink tepid coffee afterward. "Because she texted me. Said she wanted me to come. Said she wanted to show you she could have anyone." For a beat, the room was an aquarium of breath. Her fingers twisted in the fabric of her dress like a mariner at a rope. The candles guttered. "You lied to me," I said. That was an understatement. 18 years of a life built on small trusts, that she would tell me when she was late, that she would call for dinner, that she would come back from trips, collapsed in a heap of words on the floor. "I didn't lie," she said. "I told you." She thought she had. She had told me she was bored, that we were drifting. She had told me, half joking, that she wanted to feel alive. I had misread the half as half-hearted. I had been too tired to push. I had taken her for granted the way a man takes a clear sky, assuming it will always be there. He, my friend, set down his small paper bag on the hall table. "I can leave," he said. "I can go. But if I go, I'll never be able to look at either of you the same." The words were a match. They threw light on things I had been trying to ignore, the late texts that came with the "do you have a minute" subject lines, the way she had started leaving the bed before me as if she feared what the dark had to offer, the quietness that had grown like a second skin. "Get out," I said at last, the command more a plea than a sentence. A night like this mutates, I thought, into a carnival of decisions. You either break or you bind tighter. He didn't go. Instead, he lifted his jaw and said something I hadn't expected at all. "I'm not the man she meant." I blinked. Then who did she mean? He looked at me as if the question offended him. "Some men think a woman's worth is what she keeps quiet," he said. "I don't. I came because I couldn't let a man I love," he caught himself, a friend, do this to himself. "You know her. You know what she does when she's cornered. This isn't about you and me, it's about choices. You might be breaking my house to fix me," I said, voice thinner than I thought possible. He shrugged. "Maybe." Then he turned to her with the strange, disconcerting softness of someone watching a friend break a wrist. "Did you think I'd be the one she wanted?" I asked. She blinked, startled, as if I'd asked for directions. I invited a man from an app," she said. "Someone I don't know. Someone who knows how to." She trailed off, the sentence dissolving under the weight of whatever fantasy she'd been carrying downstairs. Why, my voice came out small and brittle, like a throne plate. Her eyes filled fast, and not the theatrical tears you practice in mirror, real, raw ones. Because I wanted you to feel something, she whispered. To see me seen. To watch you jealous. I didn't. I thought it would wake you. The confession landed with a weird sense of finality. It was a desperate, adolescent thing, a dare dressed as liberation. She wanted to be seen and, in the seeing, she wanted me to move. The plan was childish, the wound it created, not. You wanted to wake me by stabbing me, I said. That's the plan. It's complicated, she said, voice cracking. I'm sorry. Sorry. The word was small, almost apologetic. That's not going to cut it. You shouldn't say that, my friend, said quietly. Not when you're the one who's been missing. His look was an arrow. In that instant I saw the times I'd let things slide, the way arguments ended with the kind of half-apologetic hug that made resentment go underground. I had been coasting. She had been navigating the undercurrent alone. She looked at me and laughed again, this time without joy. You're melodramatic, she said. You love to think you're a tragedy. That's not fair, I said. Fairness had nothing to do with it. What this did have to do with was a decision. I could either explode, become the monstrous version of myself who would make the threat I joked about real, or I could do something else. Something quieter. Something that would hurt in a way that would live on in memory rather than flesh. I surprised myself by choosing the quiet. Sit down, I said. They both did as told, the three of us forming an odd triangle in the kitchen where I'd once thought nothing but soft things would happen. The cake drooped between us like a failed apology. The candles burned low. I'm going to ask you questions, I said. And I want honest answers. No spin, no justification, no performance. We're done with performances. She flinched, he nodded like a man about to step into a boxing ring. The game began. Who is he? I said. A man from an app, she said. Someone I've been texting. Where did you find him? Online. Not here. Not local. Has he ever been here? No. Have you met him in person? No. So tonight was the plan to meet him? To show you. To show me what? That I can. Can what? That I can be desired. The conversation dug through skin, found bone. She wanted to be desired, of course she did, but the way she'd said about proving it made it an aggressive act. Desire is not a trophy to be presented. Hink, my friend, had been listening the whole time, his jaw tight. He leaned forward so the lamplight cut across his face. How long? He asked suddenly. How long what? She said. How long has this been going on? The feeling? The talking? The wanting to run? She stared at him as if surprised he would ask such a blunt question. Months, she said finally. Maybe more. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. She shrugged, as if shrugging could erase decisions. Because you would fix it, and I didn't want it fixed. I wanted to feel the pull. You wanted to craft your own exit wound, I said. And you wanted applause for the self-injury. I didn't want applause, she said, voice small now. I didn't know how to make you feel it without breaking everything. So I thought small, a dare. The word dare hung in the air like a seed. It explained nothing and everything. She had been playing with the idea of danger not because she wanted to leave, but because she wanted to be seen as dangerous, a woman who could be stolen. Underneath it all, I thought, was something far tamer and more terrifying than betrayal. She didn't feel important in the script of our life together. You thought you could fix the script by adding a scene, I said. Yes, she said. And I thought maybe you'd get jealous. Maybe you'd fight. Maybe you'd remember. Remember what? That was the question that pounded against me like fists. Remember that once we danced in the kitchen with a mop as a prop? Remember that once we'd been young with mouths full of promises? Or remember that I existed in the same bed? I looked at him, the man who'd been my friend through all the stupid, tender disasters. His hands were folded, his eyes were wet. Do you love her? I asked, not knowing why I needed to know. He inhaled, like the answer was occupying his throat. I've always cared, he said. But not like that. The finality in his voice should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like an instrument turning in some private wound. You lied to me, I said again. It was all I had that felt truthful. She bit her lip. I told you I was unhappy. You said you wanted to work on it, I said. You said we could do couples therapy. You said you still wanted us. You said a lot of things, she said. But you never insisted. You never pushed. You always folded. You took the easy kindness, and I I wanted something else. That was it, the slow theft of attention. She hadn't been stolen by another man so much as given up for lost to the erosions of indifference. It was an old story, and the cruelty of it was not that she sought replacement but that she had to dramatize her absence to be acknowledged. So what now? He asked, leaning back. Do you want him to come in? Do you want me to leave? Do you want me to testify that you were the reason I can't be a coward for you? She looked at him, then at me. I don't know, she said. I thought I did. Her answer was a door left open and locked at once. I thought of the threat I'd made, the hyperbolic promise to rip a man apart, and felt foolish for the cruelty of a sentence born of hurt. I wanted to be savage. I wanted to be annihilating. But annihilation gives you nothing to remember but the moment before you stop breathing. I wanted, perversely, for this to be remembered. I wanted to make a memory that would heal or at least instruct. Leave, I said to him. His expression collapsed with the weight of relief and defeat. He rose slowly, gathering the weight of an entire friendship like a coat thrown over his arm. He looked at me for a long time. If you want to handle this like a show, do it, he said. But I'll be outside if you need me. He left not in the theatrical slam that a man scorned might choose, but quietly, the kind of exit that says there is no side to take but the one that preserves what dignity remains. The front door closed behind him with the soft click of a life turning a page. We were left alone, the three of us, with a cake and a clock and the long possibility of ruin. She touched my hand, an automatic gesture, as if intimacy could be switched back on by habit. I let her, and in that small contact I felt the old machinery of us, familiar, warm, and old. Tell me what you want, I said. She searched my face for a long time, like a diver trying to map the bottom of a lake in the dark. I wanted you to notice, she said finally. I wanted you to fight for me. Is this how you wanted me to fight? I didn't know what else to do, she whispered. Maybe that was the cruelest part, she hadn't wanted to hurt me, she'd wanted to be seen. But the way she went about seeking sight had weaponized intimacy. I stood, the chair scraping a high, angry note. Then we will do this differently, I said. Not with theatrics, not with men on porches. We'll do it with truth. But if you wanted to make me feel alive by breaking me, you should know I will not be the one to break. She looked at me, skepticism and a flicker of something like hope ward across her face. What are you going to do? She asked. I could have called friends, lawyers, therapists. I could have left then and there, suitcase in hand. I could have done the thing I threatened, turned my hands into the blunt instruments of rage. Instead, I chose something that felt like revenge and like rescue at once. I would make her remember herself through a loss. I would not be cruel, I would be consequential. I would make her answer for the choice she made and then let the truth decide what we were. I'm going to ask you to leave, I said. For a while. Let's see what absence does. If you want to fix this, prove to me you can. If you don't, then we'll see what the world wants to be without us. She blinked, tears forming anew. You can't be serious, she said. Watch me, I said. That night she packed a bag with a deliberateness that felt like a performance in itself. She kissed my forehead as if it were a benediction and stepped out into the night, taking the echo of the porch light with her. The door closed. The apartment smelled suddenly like disclosure, old coffee, and the sting of regret. I went to the window and watched her cross the street, a small silhouette beneath sodium lights. I wished, absurdly, that I had the sort of anger that would bruise anyone who crossed it. Instead, I felt a calmer thing, the tremor of someone who'd been given a decision to make and was about to choose how to live with it. When I turned from the window, the room felt too big, as if all the furniture was new and alien. On the table, the cake sat like a final relic of the evening we'd lost. I cut a small slice and ate it slowly, tasting sugar and ash. Outside, the night breathed. I did not sleep. I made a list. It wasn't a plan to hurt. It was not the violent fantasy I'd threatened on the steps. It was a ledger of small, inevitable consequences: cancel the joint accounts, move out the sentimental things, unplug the shared devices. I would not make a scene. I would not humiliate her. I would let loss be the teacher. And then I called my best friend. He answered on the second ring, voice rough. You did it, he said. I did, I said. Are you okay? No, the truth felt heavy and useless. But I'm starting. Listen, for the next 30 days, nothing dramatic. No surprises. We'll do paperwork. We'll sleep in different rooms. If this is salvageable, we'll know by the end. He was silent on the other end, and in that quiet I heard the question hang: who will we be at the end of 30 days? Whatever happens, he said finally, I've got your back. I pictured him standing on my porch earlier, the way he had, but this time the image shifted, him as an ally, not an intruder. It was the most adult thing either of us had done in a long while. The next morning I woke to an inbox full of small betrayals, text threads, emails, a calendar invite to a weekend retreat she'd never mentioned. The world was suddenly a mirror turned inside out, and I had to find my reflection. The first day of the 30 became the first day of something that felt like a slow boil. I called a lawyer for advice, not to sue, but to understand the logistics of disentanglement in case we could not weave the net back together. I moved the photos of us that lined the mantle into a box and labeled it maybe. I changed the password to the streaming account we'd shared for years, small and petty, and felt a guilty satisfaction at the power it gave me. But the most important thing I did was write. I wrote everything I could remember that had been good. I wrote the stupid things that had made me laugh until my sides hurt. I wrote the nights we'd stayed up talking about impossible futures and came back from madness each time with the other person's warmth. I wrote the bad things, too, the times we'd let each other down, the silences, the little leading ways. I wrote so that absence would have something to chew on. On the third day, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a text, but an envelope with my name written in her hand. My fingers trembled when I slid it open. Inside, a single line. I didn't know how to ask for you. That admission was both a knife and a bomb. It told me she had seen the mess her actions made, but it didn't promise anything. That night I walked to the bar where my friend waited. He was already there, 2 beers cooling on the wood, a posture of someone who'd slept too little. When I sat, he didn't ask what had happened, only slid a coaster toward me with a small note on it: "I won't let you make a mistake you'll regret." "What did you want me to do?" I asked him. He sipped, then said, "I wanted you to be better than you thought you could be. This is where men either show their worst or their best. You chose to keep your hands clean. That's the war won." "Is it?" I asked. He shrugged. "Sometimes the best revenge is living through the thing that nearly kills you." I laughed, short and surprising. The sound didn't fix anything, but it was honest. Outside, the city breathed on, indifferent and enormous. We were still friends, barely, stitched together from shared histories. My friend's betrayal, if that's what it had been, felt less like betrayal and more like an indictment of how little any of us had been paying attention. He had been a messenger who refused to be the instrument of a choice he couldn't support. In the end, the door had opened to a man I loved who said the thing I had wanted to hear, not the violent promise or the theatrical revenge, but the quiet knowledge that he would stand with me while I chose what was next. The first week blacked out into routines: coffee alone, separate beds, long, hollow walks. I was careful not to become the monster my throat had threatened to make me. The anger was a thing I visited and then left, like an old friend who overstayed and drank my milk. The silence between us was a gully I was not yet prepared to cross. But under the silence, unnoticed and stubborn, something shifted. It would not be quick. It would be messy. It would be honest. And for the first time since the bell had rung, I felt like I had a hand on the tiller again, steering through a tide that wanted to take us both. By the second week I'd learned how to sleep in the middle bed again without the unconscious habit of reaching for a body that wasn't there. I had always been an excellent applier of bandages, for scrapes, for bruised pride, for others' small disasters. But when the pain was mine, the process was slower. She had moved into a small guest room at a friend's apartment uptown. I had thought about going to collect her, I had thought about surprising her with flowers and a dinner that would say everything without words. Instead, I left space. I called twice a day at first, then once, then only when the days pushed a question into my mouth that I needed answered aloud. In those calls she sounded different. There were new pauses, the sound of someone remembering how to shape a sentence alone. She spoke of minor things she'd done for herself, a haircut that shocked me, a class on something called pottery she'd always scoffed at. There was a tremor of discovery in her voice that made me glad and sick at the same time. "Are you seeing anyone?" I asked once, purely to accuse the silence of something. "No," she said. "Not like that. I'm seeing myself." The phrase made me think of a mirror, of someone cleaning glass and finding the face behind it. It also made me think of my friend, who had taken himself out of the equation with a dignity that made me feel both ashamed and grateful. He had been the unexpected sacrament of the whole mess. On day 12 he showed up at my door with 2 coffees and a battered book under his arm. He looked like a man who'd been awake at terrible hours thinking himself small. His presence was an anchor. "You okay?" he asked, handing me the coffee. The barista's name had been artfully smudged. "Probably not," I said. He nodded like a man who'd expected that. "Good. Let's not rush anything. But also, have you thought of writing a letter? Not the kind you print and sign, but one you write because you have to put it somewhere. Not for her to read unless she asks. Just for you." "I already have," I said. "Pages." "Read one to me," he said. So I did. I read the letters I'd written in my head while making coffee, the ones that made confessions to no one and returned nothing but the sound of my own voice. He listened like a priest. "You should send one," he said when I finished. "To who?" I asked. "To her, if you want. To yourself if you don't." There was a temptation to use my words as weapons, to compose a litany of everything she'd done wrong and mail it as a parting sermon. But vengeance that's only justified by sarcasm rarely heals. Instead, I wrote something honest that felt like a map of where I stood, what I missed, what I forgave, what I could not accept. I signed it not with hatred but with clarity. I dropped it in the mail. 2 days later she called. I read it, she said. It made me see things. Good, I said. That was the point. The line went quiet and then she asked a question that bruised. Are you planning on fighting? Or leaving? Or just watching me fail? I'm planning on not making a spectacle, I said. I'm planning on being honest. I'll fight if the fight is for us. If the fight is for power, I'm done. There was a relief in my friend's company that felt like an old coat. We talked about ordinary things until our conversations, small at first, became the scaffolding I needed to stand on. He was not a replacement, he was a mirror reflecting back to me the parts of myself that needed remembering. On the 15th day she came back to the apartment for a single evening. She walked in with a bag of groceries and an apology that was more action than sentence. She cooked for us in a way she hadn't in months. The simplest act of chop and simmer became an attempt at reparation. We ate like strangers at first, then like siblings, then something else. Why are you here? I asked when the plates were cleared. To try, she said. Not for us to go back to where we were, but to see if we can build something new. It was a terrifying proposition. I'd spent 2 weeks practicing the smell of betrayal as a permanent scent. The idea of rebuilding was like standing on a bridge that might not hold. But there was a thread of hope, thin and stubborn, and I wanted to tug on it. We started therapy. Not because a stranger on a couch with a box of tissues would wave a wand and make the past disappear, but because we needed rules. Rules mattered when feelings were messy. We wrote them down like laws: honesty about contact with others, a 2-week rule for big decisions, a daily check-in where we spoke about one thing we appreciated. It felt like planting seeds in a yard of ash. For a while, everything was a test. Would she go through with the boundaries she consented to? Would I revisit the barbs of anger when she lingered on the phone? We failed sometimes, slipped back into complacency, fell into old patterns, but each failure felt like a bruise that grew soft over time. It was messy, and I kept my friend as a sounding board. He didn't tell me what to do, he only reminded me of the edge I might not see when the tide rose. Then came the day I saw the wrong kind of message, not explosive, not illicit, but the kind of flirtatious compliment you give someone to watch them bloom. It was a text from a man in her pottery class. My chest clenched. The old narrative wanted to roar. Instead, I did something different. I put the phone face down and went to find her. She was in the bathroom with clay under her nails, laughter in her voice. You're pale, she said when she saw me. I'm not, I lied. She wiped her hands, came to me, and kissed the hollow beneath my jaw, an apology without words. I'm learning to be seen, she said. Not for applause. For myself. The thing about recovery is that it doesn't follow a straight line. There were relapses into old habits, arguments that flared like roadside fires, nights when silence felt like an indictment. But there were also the small, stubborn victories: a morning where we drank coffee in companionable hush, a night where we danced in the kitchen with the stupid mop handle again, a conversation that went long and honest until the sun had shifted. My friend moved through these weeks like a lighthouse. He never preached, he attended. He was there when I needed a witness to small triumphs and a shoulder through the harder reckonings. He never crossed the line again. He was not the other man, he was the friend who chose not to destroy a life he'd helped build. On the 40th day, when our 30-day experiment had long since stretched into something neither of us had predicted, she told me a story I'd never heard: how she'd sat in a cafe with her phone and almost gone through with the plan to meet the stranger, how she'd imagined me there, watching, and the pleasure had been less than the hollow it created. She said the loneliness she'd felt wasn't from me alone, it was from both of us drifting like ships without a light, and when she saw the look on my face, she knew she'd chosen the wrong way to demand rescue. It would have been easier if she had said she'd made a terrible mistake and begged for forgiveness. But she didn't perform contrition. She offered instead the labor of repair. We worked. She enrolled in therapy that was hers alone, not because I demanded it but because she wanted to map her own architecture of absence and belonging. We attended couples therapy with calendars full of assigned tasks that felt like homework for adults: 1 date a week, 5 minutes of gratitude a day, no screens at dinner. The rituals felt small but they were anchors. The repetition widened the spaces between us where resentment used to live. The public, the friends, the neighbors, the casual acquaintances who used to peg us as a together sort of couple, watched our awkward reconciliation like a daytime soap. The gossip was a low hum that sometimes got under my skin, but mostly we ignored it. We were not performing for them. We were performing for ourselves. There were moments of deep tenderness. Once, in the middle of winter, I woke to find the apartment warmed and a note on the kettle: I'm sorry for not telling you I was drowning. You pulled me back in the way only you could. Love, with a smudge of handwriting that felt like a bomb. I cried then, not the sharp hot anger of the early days but a deep reclamation. We were not the same people. The husband who had threatened violence on a doorstep had learned that his rage was not strength. The wife who had tried to stage a theft of attention had learned that stunts yield only short chiaroscuros of feeling. The friend who'd stood on the porch had learned that loyalty could mean intervention rather than indulgence. Months passed and the anniversary that had been shattered came around again. I bought a new cake, small and deliberate, and we lit a single candle. We sat like two survivors making tea in the ruins of an older life. There were scars, small, pale lines woven into our skin, but they were the proof that something had been navigated and not abandoned. When the bell rang that night, both of us turned with a small joke on our lips. It was my friend, of course, returning with a bottle of cheap wine and a ridiculous hat that made him look like a conspiracy theorist at a dinner party. He handed it to us like an offering. Thought you might like a third wheel who knows when to get off the bike, he said, and then he sat and laughed until we all did. We survived because we chose not to make punishment the point. We survived because we chose the harder path, to be honest, to accept consequences, to ask for help and to receive it. To rebuild is less glamorous than to break, but the work of gluing things back together teaches you how to carry them without dropping them again. There were unexpected blessings. The intimacy returned but different, less automatic, more chosen. Our sex life, when it returned in earnest, was gentler and less about performance and more about listening. We learned how to say I need without making it an accusation. We learned the small art of noticing. One evening, months later, she found the box of photographs labeled Maybe. We sat on the floor and sifted through them, laughing and wincing at the younger versions of ourselves. Why did you keep these? She asked. Because maybe is a dangerous word, I said. She closed the lid with a decisive movement. Let's make less of our marriage about maybes. We put the box on the shelf. It was a small promise, but promises made in the light of day are the only ones that last. The truth is, nothing magical happened to erase the night of the doorbell. That memory remained a raw seam, an anniversary we honored with quiet more than with celebration. Sometimes it bled into arguments, into distrust, into the late-night fears we whispered to each other. But it also became our proof that we had crashed and not disintegrated, that we could rebuild. There were other endings, not the theatrical dismemberment of a visitor on a porch that I had once fantasized about, but quieter dissolutions I had to accept too. The arrogance of assuming you can possess someone forever, the belief that pain must be answered by pain, those attitudes died off slowly. They were replaced with something steadier, a willingness to be present even when presence is hard. In the end, what no one expected was not a violent spectacle but the slow, stubborn way two people who had once been fond of each other chose, day after day, to be kind. The man who'd stood on my porch that night came to all our small victories and stayed for the quiet ones. He married later, to someone who showed him the same steadiness he'd shown us. We never became perfect. We became something adequate, honest, imperfect, working. On a later anniversary, one that felt less like a test and more like a tender reckoning, we sat in the kitchen with a single candle and the cake we'd chosen together. She held my hand and said, without theatrics, "Thank you for not making me the kind of woman who needed to be stolen." I looked at her, at the lines at the corners of her eyes that laughter had made. I thought of the night the bell rang, of the threat I'd made in fury, of the long slow months that followed. I thought of the friend on the porch, and of how people sometimes stand at thresholds not to break but to mend. "Thank you," I said back. "For trying." We ate the cake slowly. Outside, the streetlight hummed like a steady presence. Inside, the apartment smelled of sugar and old coffee and forgiveness. We were still learning how to be a we that did not demand spectacle. We were, quietly, still choosing.